Hello and welcome to the current episode of Unboxing Russia. My name is Pradnya and together with ŠULьМАN, today for a change we are going to talk about two big current events happening in our respective countries. One is a promising one, potentially if it goes through. One is a devastating one if it goes through. So we start with the devastating one and hope to end on the promising note. But the second one can be
devastating as well.
I said if it goes through. So that's a disclaimer. But that being said, so if you remember last time when we did the episode, we talked about the Union of India and how it came about and the different regional diversity that the current day India kind of has in itself. And if you remember, we also spoke about the state of Jammu and Kashmir, the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir back then, which signed the instrument of accession to the Union of India. And for a variety of very, very sad, heartbreaking news, Kashmir has been in the news of late.
Why is it such a problematic territory?
So for people to understand, Kashmir is at the top of the current geographical entity that is India. On one side you have China and on one side you have Pakistan. So when the partition of India happened, it happened on the lines of religion, and depending on which part of the country had a Muslim majority and which had a Hindu majority. So the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir was the biggest one at that time, and it had a Muslim majority population but was ruled by a Hindu king. So the king, when independence came about, had the option of either accessing the Union of India, joining Pakistan, or staying independent. To begin with, he chose to be independent because he feared that joining India would not go well with his constituents because it was a Muslim majority population. Going with Pakistan would not fare well for his minority population. So staying independent was probably the easier way out in his perception to begin with. But that obviously did not go well. And there was increasing pressure from Pakistan, a newly formed state, which with a lot of army and military support, kind of tried to send in insurgents, state and non-state actors, into the then Kashmir, the princely state of Kashmir, and tried to kind of forcefully acquire tracts of land. That led the king to reach out to New Delhi for help and say that I cannot deal with this situation by myself. But India had no reason to put boots on the ground because it wasn't Indian territory.
And that happened in the 50s, in the 40s, or later?
We are talking about somewhere around 1947. Mm-hmm. August 1947, India became independent, and this was happening around that same time, around August, between August and September. And then in October, the instrument of accession was signed by the king of Kashmir, and India immediately sent in its army. And the amount of land that India kind of then took over for the state of Kashmir is today's Kashmir, largely. Pakistan by then had already taken over tracts of land, large parts of which came to be known about Azad Kashmir or independent Kashmir. And Pakistan calls the Indian part of Kashmir India-occupied Kashmir. India calls the Pakistan part of Kashmir Pakistan-occupied Kashmir.
Very familiar.
And we don't talk about Aksai Chin, which is the Chinese part of Kashmir. So just to put it in context, India has access, or India kind of has control over 55% of Kashmir today as we speak. Pakistan has about 30%. And China has about 15% of the land.
Going with the line of asking stupid questions, why is it Jammu and Kashmir? What is Jammu?
So Jammu is the valley, which was traditionally had a lot of Hindu population, and Kashmir is the mountainous region. It's a very
But they both were parts of this initial princely state.
Yes, and then if you remember in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, the Indian government then abrogated the article in the Indian constitution that granted the state of Jammu and Kashmir a special status. But to go back,
its status became equivalent to the status of other lands that are part of India.
And one caveat in that was, till that point, the other or people living in other parts of India could not buy property in the state of Jammu and Kashmir because they wanted to preserve the demography, which is a very, very sensitive demography. And the abrogation of Article 370 allowed Indians from other parts of India to invest and to buy property in Kashmir. But going back to the instrument of accession, why the joining of Kashmir to the Indian Union was contested by Pakistan. So when Kashmir joined the Indian Union, the instrument of accession had a clause which said that once the boots are off the ground from both sides, there will be a plebiscite where this accession will be put to reference to the people, and people can decide if they want to join India or if they want to join Pakistan. That unfortunately never happened. Because
there was no referendum.
No. And the prerequisite for that was boots have to be off the ground.
Which also didn't happen.
No, because it was always the mutual exception. You expect the others to back off first for you to back off. And
this is called the security dilemma.
Exactly. So it continues to date to be one of the most extremely militarized regions on the face of this earth. You also have to imagine you have 3 nuclear powers having a standoff in the smallest possible region: Pakistan, India, and Kashmir and China. And depending on where we are in our relations with China and with Russia, sometimes we are friends, sometimes we are not. So for the longest time, you had to look at it in the terms of a cross. So you had China reaching out to Pakistan like this, and you had Russia and India as a ally kind of a relationship.
So why is it on the news right now?
So it is on the news right now because 2 days ago, there was a very brutal terrorist attack in Pahalgam, which is a quaint little town somewhere in Kashmir.
So it's not a capital or something central?
No, it's a tourist spot. And right now it's summer time in India, and a lot of people go to this place for vacations, for summer vacations. And this attack stood out. So it's not that Kashmir has seen such kind of an attack for the first time. Kashmir has seen a variety of very, very bloody attacks over the past 70 years.
Were they mostly carried out by suicide bombers?
No. So these were gunmen. And they just went on a rampage shooting people. And why this attack stood out was they shot at tourists. And as a matter of fact, for the longest time, tourists as targets had not been touched because they brought money, they kind of help sustain the tourism economy. So the moment you shush away the tourists, the economy cannot sustain. And that's why whatever side of the conflict you are on, tourists were not something you touched. And that has changed the whole conversation this time. And what has also changed and kind of taken up the notch in terms of how heated the discussion is right now, the gunmen asked the people who were shot for their religion. So before being shot, you are asked, are you a Hindu or are you a Muslim?
And what was the right answer?
It had to be being a Muslim. And the people who were shot had been asked to, according to people who were witnesses, they were asked to recite some verses from the Quran. And if you cannot recite them, you are shot.
So and if they were Christians?
I don't think that would have really mattered. I think as long as you're Hindu, like I told in the last episode, the moment you give away your name in India, it's a marker. You can easily decimate from that what region, what religion, what kind of caste, all of that.
I remember that was fascinating. In every society, there's some sort of connection of your name with your ethnicity and social position, but it's seldom so exact as that.
Exactly. So I think that's what's taken the discussion up by a notch. And what is also problematic is, according to witnesses, the people who shot these unfortunate people down, they let the women and the children walk, and they said, go and tell Mr. Modi. Let him know that it's his doing that these people are dying. And it's kind of a getting back at Mr. Modi, who is the face of this whole Hindu nationalist movement. But I think there are different versions of it, and we can talk about it as to why they were asked to report to.
So let me ask you plainly, is the prevalent idea in India that these attacks are being organized by Pakistan?
Yes.
Yes, so it's not just a terrorist extremist force
no.
some Muslims gone crazy, but it's state-sponsored terrorism.
It's a fine line, but I think Pakistan historically has had a very problematic relationship between its government and its army. So the government might try to say something, but the army has its own mind, and the intelligence apparatus has its own mind as well.
So army is an independent, more or less independent political actor.
And quite often they are the ones with the upper hand.
Because they have the guns.
And I think they also have the weapons, to be very honest. And right now there is an offshoot group of a terrorist outfit called Lashkar-e-Taiba, and this offshoot group called the Resistance Front, they have come out and claimed responsibility for this attack. And this Lashkar-e-Taiba is notoriously known for orchestrating some of the most brutal attacks on Indian soil that could quite factually be traced back to Pakistan. And one of them was 2008 in Bombay, where 178 people died.
And how many were the victims of this latest attack?
26. But like I said, I think part one of the conversation is because it was extremely religionized. You ask people, are you Hindu or are you Muslim? And depending on the answer, you shoot. And I think this level of brutality has not been seen for a very long time.
And the perpetrators, were they detained?
I think that's also a big question, because from the time that the shooting started till the point that the security forces reached, it was roughly a time about of 20 minutes. So imagine 20 minutes of rampage. And this is a place we are talking about which is not easily accessible. You can only get there by foot or on a horseback because it's a tourist spot. And it's in terms of altitude, it's a little higher up.
And the tourists in question are mostly people from India, so it's not foreigners. It's people from other parts of India.
They're from other parts of India, or they were from other parts of India. And what this attack has done is a variety of things, but I think the most sad thing are two things. One is peace is something which is very fragile, and you know that as well as I do. And peace is not something that can be guaranteed for. And peace in a place like Kashmir has always been fragile. For the past 2 years, especially since there was a ceasefire agreement or the reinstating of a ceasefire between the Indian and the Pakistan government,
that was in 2020, I think.
21, I think. The ceasefire was reinstated in 21, February 21.
And by the way, I think Russia and United States were the co-sponsors of this ceasefire.
Yeah. So I think since then there was some sense of peace, even however superficially. And that meant that there were tourists coming in, the economy was starting to sustain, and this doesn't go well with any machinery that feeds off war as a business model.
So, terrorist act is an understood act of brutality, but these things have happened. Why is the world right now talking about a possible conflict between the states of India and Pakistan?
So, again, a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is a lot of this can be traced back to one offhand remark by the current head of the Pakistani army a few days ago, where he referred to Kashmir as the jugular vein of Pakistan, and that they will always
as the what?
As the jugular vein. That's the vein that is the most crucial vein in any human body, and you always go for the jugular if you want to make it hurt and bleed, and that was the reference, and this was made in a very public space, and he kind of upheld the two-nation theory that it was only right for Muslims and Hindus to go separate ways, that they cannot coexist, and that it was absolutely the right decision to do. So that's one part of the conversation. So it's coming from a very, very high-ranking professional in the whole army apparatus. Second thing is, of course, Mr. Modi is not going to let this slide. And in this exceptional case, I think he may be right to a certain extent, because this has been going on for far too long. And regardless of if Mr. Modi has been in power or anyone else, I think Pakistan has always played in the shadows of some or the other patron. Earlier, it used to be the United States. Now it's China. And Pakistan always believes that it can get away. But going back to what I was trying to initially refer to, the second sad part of this entire conversation is the Indian psyche right now, also fueled by the Indian media, is not in a position to look at this act of terrorism as an act of terrorism. They're looking at it as an act of Islam, Islamic terrorism.
As an act of state aggression?
No, religious state aggression.
Religious state aggression.
So extremism doesn't know any religion, is my firm belief. Extremism in any form is extremism.
On a political level, is there an idea that now that the old political order, the old international order is seen as almost non-existent, now is the time to play for territorial stakes if you want to resolve the conflict that's been lying dormant for decades? Is there
From the Indian side, maybe, but Pakistan
is there this kind of atmosphere that now all bets are off and whoever is
From India's
strongest...
side, the bets are off. From India's side, they're definitely off.
Is it because of, again, the Russian, American, Ukrainian fracas, or is it for internal reasons or reasons specific to the region rather than international?
I think India just has far too many better options right now. I think India has the better cards right now in terms of their economic stability, in terms of where they stand internationally, in terms of what Pakistan has brought onto itself by, having very variety of people in the intelligentsia and the military apparatus who go and just speak their mind in public spaces. So they give away a lot of information that points to some amount of, playing along with these plans, if not completely sponsoring them. So I think it's a variety of reasons. The one thing that could work for Pakistan is if China kind of steps in and decides to at least mitigate some of the impact that India could do. But right now, I think India just has the biggest card in its hands, which is the Indus Water Treaty.
And what can India want to do? It can't possibly want to, change the regime in Pakistan to something more India-friendly.
No, I think India
Can it
wants...
want more land?
No, I don't think India has...
To put it in the simplest, most brutal terms.
I don't think India has expansionist ambitions. At least as we speak.
What may it want to do? To defeat Pakistani armed forces in such a way as to prevent their forming future plans of aggression?
I think what India wants to do right now, from my, again, educated guess, not an expert guess, an educated guess is hold Pakistan accountable and bring Pakistan to a point where they actually come out and say that, yes, we messed up. And we are going to help you, if not see to it ourselves, that these perpetrators kind of are brought to some kind of accountability. And one of the ways, we were also talking about this, one of the less bloodier but the more painful ways that India can do this is through the Indus Water Treaty.
Yes, and that was my next question, of course. What's the deal with the river? How can you stop the river?
So you cannot stop the river. But again, if you remember in one of the earlier episodes, we had said that when India was partitioned, it was a very haphazard way of drawing the line of partition. You see.
Well, this religion idea seems to have some rationale behind it.
The religion idea has, but the person who drew the line of partition was neither here nor there. He was sitting somewhere in Europe. So he didn't really know what was at stake.
He was an English lord, as
he was an English person, exactly. And he drew the line across the border, which came to be the border, dividing the Indus Valley Basin, which is home to 6 very, very crucial rivers for the subcontinent. 3 of them fall on the Indian side, 3 of them are on the Pakistani side, but the geography of the region is such that India is on the upper stream and Pakistan is on the lower stream, which means that India technically has all kinds of power to ensure how much water Pakistan gets. But despite all the bloody conflicts that India has seen with Pakistan over the past 78 years, not once was this treaty touched. And now India has decided to at least put it, to not obey it right now. I think you cannot suspend it unilaterally. That is not a thing that can be allowed through the through the treaty, but India has kind of put it on hold in a way, which means technically, to put it in numbers, because we're looking at 3 rivers on the Pakistani side, which again, like I said, India has control over, and 3 on the Indian side. So if India decides to kind of stop in some kind of way, or control the amount of water that flows into the lower parts of...
Is this water the source of, water intake or electricity as well?
Both. So I just got some numbers. 80% of irrigated land in Pakistan is dependent on water coming from this. It is 23% of Pakistan's GDP. Supports about 70% of agricultural, non-agricultural exports that Pakistan has today. Is responsible for the water supply of 68% of its rural inhabitants, which is a large part in Pakistan, and employs about 40% of the workforce. Pakistan as an economy right now is struggling massively. So you imagine you kind of start pushing, or you start really, really pushing it in where it hurts. And this is where it will hurt, because Pakistan has traditionally had very bad responses to flood situations, so they haven't really gotten the water management aspect of it under control. Climate change has played a very, very massive role in kind of turning all kinds of weather patterns around. So there is no trust in the weather to get
now
enough
there's
crops
less
around.
water to go by, as I understand.
Or lots of flooding or irregular rains. And the third part is a immense growth in population.
In Pakistan.
In that region, because it's a very fertile river basin. So that naturally attracts people. So you have these 3 factors, and just imagine the impact of it. And it's not an impact that will hurt you like for a month or for 2 days or for 2 years. It's an impact that will stay. And if India decides to kind of, suspend this agreement, India can also put in place new dams on the upper side of the rivers, which means that naturally the amount of water that flows into the lower side will be controlled, which will make any kind of hydroelectric projects not so functional as they're supposed to function, because you're controlling the water. And that has such a huge impact on people. And within a day after India announced this, there have been small and regular protests erupting in rural parts of Pakistan, because this is real for people. This goes well beyond religion. This goes well beyond you, me, or someone else.
Yeah, it's about survival.
It's about survival.
As you describe it.
And it's also about earning a livelihood.
Which is also survival.
No, but not just survival in terms of, surviving this year or the next. It's also because if the economy is doing bad in general, and then even if these kind of sources of income go away, how will you feed off your families? There is no way you can do it.
Coming back to your educated guesses, what's your next guess as to the next step? Because you understand how all that looks from the outside. We have 2 nuclear powers. One is larger and richer. The other is smaller but highly militarized. This doesn't look promising.
It doesn't look promising. My only hope and guess is China is a player which has been known to be very, very rational. China doesn't need an additional stress.
And they're generally no friend to territorial losses or acquisitions. They are
very
much in favor of stable borders.
Exactly, and they don't get mixed up in this. And if they want to have like a real face-off and stand-off with America, Pakistan is not the border that they need to have it in. So I think...
And you think that United States is likely to support Pakistan?
No, India.
United States isn't supporting anyone these days.
No, but I think if at all, I think they are really not fascinated or amused with Pakistan for a while now, irrespective of Mr. Trump. And on the opposite side, they have had fairly okayish relations with Mr. Modi and New Delhi in general. So which is a big shift after the 70s and the 80s, where US was never a partner for India.
Because India was seen as much more pro-Soviet.
Exactly. So I think if China kind of talks some sense into Pakistan and says that this is a deal breaker, you have to kind of put your money where your mouth is. And if you say you don't support terrorism, prove it. or go out and condemn terrorism and do what it takes for the pressure to go away.
They might as well try to talk to India, or the United States, saying that cutting off water supplies of a large and densely populated region is not a humane or rational step.
I think pushing Pakistan in a corner is easier than pushing India in a corner right now, especially if you...
Both are nuclear.
No, but especially, like, I think at the end of the day, India has far more proof to show that Pakistan has its fingers somewhere or the other involved in this entire mess. So that's my only hope in terms of my educated guess, because my worst case scenario, which I really, 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 really don't hope will ever come true, is having another kind of a proxy, not a war, but a conflict emerging on the India-Pakistan border where US sides with one and China sides with the other, because that would be a nightmare. Because far too many people live in that small area, and it's an extremely sensitive area not just because of the nuclear issue, but also because of the geography. You have an extremely fluid border, so you never know which side of the border you're standing on, and it's one of the most inhumane battlefields in the world. It's the highest altitude battlefield. So it has all kinds of challenges.
Coming back to my question of bad examples, again, seen from the bird's eye view, it looks like now every country that has a grievance or an unresolved territorial dispute or some beef, as young people say, with its neighbor, thinks it a good time to bring this up, because, again, the rule-based order is either non-existent or extremely weakened by the latest activities of the larger international players.
I think the saddest thing that I've seen in the internet over the past 2-3 days is people putting it up unabashedly on their social media feed saying, one more war cannot harm us.
Oh, well.
Like saying, if Israel can do Palestine, if Russia can do Ukraine, why can't India just do it? It's that time. Like, if everyone else is going to go in and do it, then let's just also prove that we are worth
something. There's an amount of nationalist enthusiasm in India about it.
But I think, how do I put it without sounding offensive? So I think we all like to be very nationalistic and very patriotic, as long as there is no talk of enlistment.
Yes, that again sounds extremely familiar.
But I don't think people are really thinking that this is going to happen.
People love watching TV or reading social media news, rooting for their team.
And thinking and let's go and kill them.
Yeah, they can even survive some sort of economic hardship as long as they think that it adds to their side's winning position. But so long as they are not the ones doing the actual fighting.
And here's a small addendum, because I think I can go on on this topic for a long time. But the most challenging and the most delicate part of this conversation is the conversation of Indian Muslims. Because, like, as is the case in any minority, if someone does something in your name, but you have nothing to do with it, you still have a kind of a moral responsibility, or the world around you expects you to come out
at least you
and
have
condemn
to prove
it.
That you have nothing to do with it.
Exactly. And right now, I think there are a lot of people who are just blinded by their revenge, or their hope for revenge, or the wish for revenge, that they cannot make this distinction between, just by the virtue of being a Muslim doesn't make you an extremist Muslim. And I think
that sounds like a disgustingly familiar situation.
Exactly. So I think that is the most delicate and the most sad part of the conversation. But I do hope that once people have calmed down a little and have taken a stock of the situation, that the hope is that people will be able to distinguish between, because at the end of the day, a lot of people who were saved during these firings were saved by the horsemen or the people who are vendors, working as, I don't know, selling off something to eat, and they are Muslims. So they also ended up saving a lot of lives. So I think it's a challenge for the media to kind of also, push these kind of narratives out and say that.
I think you mentioned earlier, what's the percentage of Islamic population in India?
About 18%.
About 18%.
So we're looking at 200 million plus people.
And are they equally or unequally distributed?
Unequally, I would say.
So there are certain Muslim-dominated territories, and there are others where they're more scarce.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if there is a conflict, then of course they will be seen as suspect for sympathy.
But that's why they have been going out very, very consciously, wearing black armbands. Today, Friday prayers, a lot of people who went to the mosque were wearing black bands.
And what do black bands mean?
It's a sign of protest.
Of protest.
Or mourning and protest. Like you kind of, you're trying to kind of signalize that you condemn this. So that has been happening. But talking about conflicted territories, you are not new to the party either.
No, again, bad examples spread so fast. This is really very dispiriting. So we were trying very hard to avoid digging into an unfamiliar territory of international politics expertise, but things have been going on at such a rate that I'm afraid we can't completely avoid the subject.
Not do it.
And then, I have, speaking of bad examples, I have an additional incentive. People doing international relations these days, at least in some countries, seems to be so, how would I put it, amateurish themselves, that it sort of eases the atmosphere. If they can do it, if real estate dealers can do international negotiations, then why can't we comment on it? So right now, as we speak, Reuters international agency has published a document that they say was presented by US envoy Steve Witkoff on the 17th of April to the president of Russia in Moscow. And this is a very short document couched in a language that in some places is surprisingly, I would say, oddly specific. And in others, I'll elaborate on that. And in other places, it's again extremely, and one would almost think intentionally vague. So I think I'll read it because it's short, and it has this touching preface: transmit verbally. So, transmit verbally. Russia-Ukraine deal framework. Overview. These terms represent the final offer from the United States to both sides. So, final, as they say in Russia, the 160s final Chinese offer. There's such a joke. Again, its historical roots are unknown to me, but it's very often used. Ceasefire. Permanent ceasefire. Both sides immediately engage in technical implementation negotiations. So in negotiations on how to technically implement the ceasefire. Very good. Something of a wishful thinking thing, but first things first. Ukraine security guarantee. That's my favorite part. Ukraine receives robust security guarantee. What is robust? Who measures the degree of robustness? And guarantees from whom? But okay, receives. Guarantor states will be an ad hoc grouping of European states plus willing non-European states. Ad hoc sounds nice, like improvise. What can go wrong? European states plus willing non-European states. I think it means that European Union will not be a guarantor as an entity.
But the individual member states.
Individual members, yes.
But I'm not so sure if the European individual member states are fascinated by this proposal. But we'll come to it.
By being part of this ad hoc grouping.
Without having been asked or consulted.
Yes, plus willing non-European states. That's kind, because non-willing European states are not to be dragged into, unlike European states. Ukraine will not seek to join NATO. Ukraine may pursue EU membership. Good enough.
Which is very generous.
Extremely. Territory. US provides de jure recognition of Russian control of Crimea. US.
Who is the US to provide recognition? Like, what role do they play?
Well, the current administration of United States recognizes that Crimea is Russian. That's how I read it. And
okay.
So in 2018, when the president was the same president, they officially declared that they do not recognize the Russian control of... Yes, that's a change in stance. And then the next administration comes in, it can change its stance once more, which is bad for international morals, as we have discussed already, but international morals are not in the best state to begin with. US provides de facto recognition of Russian control of Luhansk. US provides de facto recognition of Russian-controlled parts of Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Kherson. So, notice the difference. Recognition of Russian control of Luhansk, but Russian-controlled parts. So we have those 4 imaginary subjects of the Russian Federation that are in Russian constitution, none of which is fully controlled by Russian army. I think the logic here may be the following. Luhansk region is the most, the most part of its territory is already under Russian control, unlike the other 3. Because Russia controls Luhansk, the city, and most of the territory. But in Donetsk, in Zaporizhia, and in Kherson, this is not the case. So perhaps the idea is that Ukraine will cede this part of the territory of Luhansk region that it holds, while in the other 3 regions, Russia holds what it has. Next, Ukraine regains territory in Kharkiv Oblast. So Russians are to recede from this very small parts of Kharkiv Oblast that they currently control. Ukraine regains control of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant through US control and administration of the plant, with electricity distributed to both sides, and also Kakhovka Dam. Again, this is where the oddly specific part comes in. So the Zaporizhia electric plant, nuclear electric plant, is an important entity. It's been under Russian control since, if I'm not mistaken, 2023. And there's been an explosion in Kakhovka Dam, which resulted in a huge ecological disaster for this whole region. So now Russia is to liberate it, well, at least to get out of it. But what does it mean Ukraine regains control of the power plant through US control and administration of the plant? So Russians go away, Americans get in, and this is how Ukraine has the control. And also the Kakhovka Dam, what also? Also through American administration and control? Or does this also refers to Ukraine regaining control of the plant through so-and-so, and of the dam through the same means or independently? That is not clear. Next, Ukraine enjoys unhindered passage on Dnipro River and control of the Kinburn Spit. Again, the specific geography. This spit, it's a part of land between water bodies in Nikolaev Oblast. It is, as I understand, strategically important for the ability to control the passage on the Dnipro River, which is a big river, important economically and militarily as well. Ukraine, enjoys unhindered passage. Okay, not controlled, but unhindered passage. United States and Ukraine will implement economic cooperation / minerals agreement. That is as vague as you want it to be. What agreement? What are the minerals in question? Implements an agreement which is not there yet. Ukraine to be fully reconstructed and compensated financially.
By whom?
A very natural question. Doesn't say anything. Sanctions on Russia resulting from this conflict since 2014 will be removed. Again, by whom? Are we speaking about US-imposed sanctions or EU-imposed sanctions, which matter most to Russia economically speaking? Because US-Russia trade is, if not negligible, at least vastly inferior to the Russia-EU trade, especially in the energy sector. And last but not least, US-Russian economic cooperation on energy and other industrial sectors. That's it. One commentator said that the text looks like it's been written by ChatGPT. It does. It combines, again, exactitude with vagueness. It doesn't sound diplomatic, but again, it's not couched in the usual language of international negotiations, but it sounds very much like what the current team of players on the American side would compose with a little help from ChatGPT. So, generally speaking, it's not a bad deal for Ukraine considering the situation. They're not forced to recognize anything. All recognition is from the American side. They are not forced to recede from any territory that they currently hold, except maybe, again, if I understand correctly, this point about Luhansk.
So let me ask you this question. You were just in the US and you must have caught up on some chatter here or there.
Well, just being in Washington doesn't make you privy to all the conversations in Washington, but I was in Washington, yes.
But I think quite often the more interesting conversations, the real conversations are not necessarily happening in Washington, but around, wherever you are up and about. So here's the question. I heard a very provocative podcast today, or not the podcast, but the title was provocative. It's Trump playing Mr. Putin. So in the beginning, it seemed like they're about to join hands.
Okay, let's have some more tea on this.
And they're going to become friends and, like BFFs. And now it doesn't seem like that. Did you get a sense of what is happening in the American circles? And of course, from whatever circles you're back in Russia, are they looking at this whole conversation with like ridicule, like, Trump and one of his things? Or are they having a more measured response? Are they concerned about how it's panning out after the initial, hoopla about, oh, wow, like he seems to be on our side?
Well, a lot of people I've met in Washington and a lot of structures whose work I'm witnessing look like people who watch an explosion in slow motion and are concentrated on this rather than on anything else. The current administration is largely seen as chaotic and unpredictable. This is no news to anybody. You don't need to be an expert to have the same assessment. But in terms of, I've heard that, and again, one so dislikes trading in gossip, but I've heard rather persistently that the real backdoor channels, the real communications now go through business people and business structures rather than through official departments, experts, and people who ought to be employed in this kind of thing. Or the
business people just become part of the establishment.
Or, well,
like
the business people become, yes. The example is, of course, Witkov. The example is the head of Russian-American Chamber of Commerce. And, of course, the example that is before everybody's eyes is Kirill Dmitriev, the newly active ex-Twitter user who is posting things.
Newly active ex-Twitter user.
Yes, in caps lock and with a lot of exclamation marks and with emoji. So emoji is the new language of diplomacy these days. It used to be Latin, then French, then English, and now it's just pictures. So we are back into the original ages of writing. Writing in
primitive.
Yes, pictograms, this kind of thing. But I said the word amateurish. There may be advantages to this. If you have a conflict that professionals have not been able to resolve, maybe this kind of fresh, naive look can bring certain results. We do so much want the good scenario to happen, although in the situation we're in, there are, frankly, no good scenarios. But there are the bad, the very bad, and the awful. So we might prefer the bad to the awful. Maybe we're pinning our hopes on illusions. Perhaps we are. Again, the text that I've just read doesn't strike one as too serious. I understand more of the Russian side than of the American side, of course. Maybe this sort of bluntness is generally the feature of American
of the
external
current American
policy style. Maybe it was the feature all the time, but not to the same degree. I was, low-key amused by American spokesperson accusing Ukrainian President Zelensky of, discussing negotiations in public media when it should be done secretly. The American side has been doing it like 24 times in 24 hours, and now
on family chat groups.
Also on Truth Social, network on all sorts of networks out there, including Spotify. And now they're accusing somebody else of not being, discreet enough for real grown-up diplomacy. So I prefer to look at these things from Russians' point of view, because this is what I can at least understand. I do see that the Russians, our diplomatic corps, the team that are negotiating from the Russian side, they are looking at the Americans as dilettantes, as newbies, as people who have just come into this field, don't know a thing about it, and may not be there tomorrow. We, the official Russians, may be overproud of the fact that members of the Russian negotiating team has been doing the same thing for 25 years. This in itself is not, well, it is a qualification, but it is not necessarily a good thing. They may have lost whatever sanity they initially possessed in sitting on the same chair for 25 years without moving, but they do know the stuff they know, unlike New York real estate dealers, who again may fall out with the boss next week, and they will be there no longer, and will have, I don't know, his son-in-law now coming to the next negotiation tour. So they evidently think that sitting it out, dragging on these negotiations may be their best tactic, because frankly, Russia can continue the war on this scale for another 3 years.
Do you think the economy will sustain that?
The economy has now been more or less
a war economy?
No, it is not. It is a war economy, or an economy that has been, as the popular expression has it, moved on to military rails, means that civic parts of the economy have been militarized. This is not what has happened. Russian economy is still a civic-based economy whose main component is trade, retail, and transportation connected to retail. The militarization in question means that our military capacities have been ramped up to their, some say, maximum possible speed of production. But this maximum possible speed of production, if it cannot be increased further, it can be continued at the same rate. The problem is the people. Again, the general understanding is that while Russian economy is fragile, our human resources are inexhaustible. I strongly suspect that in reality it's the other way around. The economy has been going on more or less on a controlled basis. We have high inflation, we have rising prices, we have growing economic inequalities. The wartime bonanza has happened for some sectors and for some social stratas, but not for the others. But this, again, given that we're not a democracy, so authorities are not answerable to the electorate, this is sustainable. But the Russian side is constantly raising the amount of payments to those who sign contracts with the Ministry of Defense. This is becoming increasingly difficult for the regions on whom this weight of payments mainly falls, because there's a federal part of payment, but it's a smaller one. The greater part, and the one that is increasing, because they need to recruit people, so they need to raise prices for cannon fodder, but the regional part is much bigger. And we see fantastic amounts of payments on the part of very poor regions. How is this possible? It is possible through the, involuntary donations of local businesses. It means they're being milked for patriotic, funding. And this is difficult. So again, I said that economically the model is sustainable, but humanely speaking, not in terms of humanity as humanism, but in terms of human resources, it is not. But this also is connected to the economy. So you need to pay more and more to attract the people. Recently, there's been an increase in the number of people who sign the contracts because there's an idea that the war will soon be over. So you get the money, but you don't get to fight. This is pretty tragic because the fighting is going on and it's absolutely lethal. Now that, unfortunately, society, both in the country and even outside of Russia, has become accustomed to this rate of human loss, this happened exactly at the time when human loss is at its highest. We were more sensitive to this in 2022 when we were new to this enormous human loss. But now it's actually larger, but we are much more indifferent. That's human nature, but it's pretty horrible. It's natural, but it's horrible. So,
but let me come back to the original question when we started out. So I said the first scenario that we spoke about was the devastating one, if it panned out, and we spoke about that one, which was Kashmir and Pakistan. And in my, how do you say, naive way of looking at things, I thought that this scenario, in the context of Russia and Ukraine war coming to some sort of a end, could be a promising one. And you had your reservations.
I have my reservations, but let us look at the bright side. I said that Russia can sustain this thing for a couple, maybe 3 years longer, with a caveat, and that's a big one.
Which is?
Recruitment. But I know that Russian authorities don't want to antagonize the American administration. And exactly the idea that tomorrow there may be a new one makes them hurry to hedge their bets and to get as much
as they can
out of those, again, amateurish negotiators. So now is the time. Maybe you quoted this headline, is Trump playing Putin? Is Putin playing Trump? We can agree, the Russians can agree to whatever in order to show that the deal breakers are Ukrainians, not them. And this is playing into the already existing antipathy of American president and Ukrainian president and his soulful affinity to the Russian leadership. He is known to be extremely fond of an autocrat. Some of my American colleagues said that he never yet met an autocrat he didn't like. So he likes the North Korean leader. He likes your prime minister. And by the way, Mr. Modi is coming to Victory Day celebrations in Moscow. So he does, and Xi Jinping. That's
like we said a few days ago.
So it will be a very presentable delegation.
I think considering the situation of the world that we are in right now, I think some leaders seem more amicable and approachable and to the point of being acceptable in the shadow of the others. So,
you mean that some people don't look so bad in comparison?
Yeah, it's all relative.
So that the bad guy
bar
in the
is
room,
set so low,
yes,
that anything above that is like, oh, wow, democratic, fairly acceptable, amicable.
Well,
respecting consensus.
You know what? If I got anything out of our numerous conversations about India, is that it is still a democracy.
It is. It's a one with its own faults.
Yes, everyone. Nobody's perfect, but it is a democracy because elections matter, and because elections can be meaningfully participated in both by the contestants and by the voters.
We may not to be specific. The analysts may not get the results they want, but it's still an election. Versus you don't have an election, and then of course you don't get the result you want. So
yes.
Two very different scenarios.
Yes, exactly so. So Victory Day celebrations, and you know what? To conclude my assessment of the Russian side's ideas, the yearly presidential address to the Federal Assembly has been postponed and postponed and postponed again. It was expected in February. It didn't happen. And recently, the presidential press secretary said that it will happen this year, but the date has not been resolved upon. That means that what the president wants is to declare a victory. He was evidently expecting
waiting for it.
Yes, for something that he can deliver.
And take credit for.
Yes, of course, take credit for. He was expecting, I guess, that something may happen between the Easter break and the 9th of May. Because, of course, the Victory Day parade would be an ideal situation. And of course, if something comes up, then we may perhaps have the Victory Day celebration and address to the Federal Assembly, which will be the new Victory Day. The Victory Day decorations strongly recommended for Russian cities these days. They have this date 1945-2025 victory, Победа, which may mean 80 years of victory, which is the Jubilee date, but also it may mean that there was a
45 and 25.
Yes, there was a victory in 2045, and now there's another one, comparable one, in 2025. So you see, numerology is really, seems to be the religion of the day. So magic numbers. I don't know how that will or will not be realized. What I'm trying to describe is a nuanced situation where Russia has an incentive to go on with the fighting, but it also has an incentive to at least pretend to an agreement, maybe with an understanding that next year or in another, 5 years, Ukraine will do something that will
allow them to go in again.
Of course, will serve as a pretext for renewed hostilities. This text, if it is a text, this proposition does not mention anything about constraints on Ukrainian military production or on Ukraine's ability to get military help from other countries. No word about it at all, and this is one of the crucial points for the Russians. So
before we venture into our favorite topic of conspiracy theories, which is the whole numerology conversation.
No episode is complete without some conspiracy or other.
Yeah. I think we have tried to at least scratch the surface of two very, very contentious issues, and let's hope that the scenario that I painted doesn't come true, and the scenario you painted potentially.
I painted a couple of them. Let's hope for the better case scenario. Again,
the more peaceful one.
Unfortunately, there are no good outcomes of this.
Of any war.
Of any war. And the situation Russia got itself into 3 years ago does not allow of a beneficial resolve, unfortunately. But again, there are if there are no good options, there are the bad and the ugly ones, the bad and the disastrous ones. Let's hope for the slightly better options.
But not the ugly and the disastrous ones.
Well, you know what? The not so disastrous one is pretty ugly. But, well, ugly and alive or beautiful and dead. This may be also the options on the table. Next time, when we meet, when/if, but we take it upon ourselves, to keep the rhythm and try to have those talks every 2 weeks. We will come back to the diversity of our two respective countries. We talked about regional diversities last time.
We want to talk about the social diversity.
Yes, we want to talk about the social diversity. I'll be asking.
We alluded to it a little bit today.
I'll be asking stupid questions again.
And I could do that too.
Of course. So we ask simplistic and naive questions.
I think we should rename our channel, like Russia and India for Dummies. Like we're just...
That's an excellent title, in fact.
Because we have also moved on from just talking about Russia to also including India in the conversation. And we are also trying to break up like very, very complex issues to make them easy and palatable.
Do you think we're making them easy, or are we confusing our viewers further?
I think being in a state of discomfort and confusion is a good state to be in, because that kind of induces you to think more. But I think now we are kind of just, going in a stream of consciousness kind of a space.
So we have a promise to have the next conversation in
2 weeks, two and a half weeks.
Yes. Also to discuss social diversity, social inequalities, the caste system, the Gini index in our respective countries. This is strongly connected, at least in case of Russia, I'm not so sure about India, to the regional differences and to the inequalities of population distribution in Russia. This is it's not just one big issue, it's a number of issues that I find fascinating, and I hope you do too. So thank you for joining us. Yes, for those who watch, and the comment section on our channel
read it
some of the best and highest educated on the whole of YouTube. We take enormous advantage of reading the comments. We have the most intellectual and useful suggestions in the comment section. So we're reading the comments. Keep this in mind. Don't hold back.
Yeah, and tell your friends, and whoever is interested in Russia and India about us. So see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.